we've started here with an image of the chapel. So if you've not seen the show, this is what it looks like. So this is our kind of touchstone work for this talk. Um, the chapel at YSP is this incredible space. It was built in 1744, so it has this beautiful proportion and that amazing window which exists above the space that would have once held the altar. Um, and we use it as an amazing space for art and for installation. And Liz, one of the reasons we started with this slide, kind of where we've ended up with in your career, because it's your latest project, um, is really because I think for the sculpture park in general is kind of the beginning and the end point of this sequence of work for you. So do you want to talk a little bit about the sculpture park and what it means to you?
Where do I begin? Hi, everybody, and welcome to the studio,
Thank you.
Alex. Um, the Sculpture Park has been 10 miles down the road from me. Not anymore, but I grew up in Barnsley and lived there for the first 22 years of my life. And I was taken there every weekend, all the time. If there was ever friends staying at the house, let's go to the Sculpture Park.
Hmm.
So I've seen the park evolve over 40 years. And I am the daughter of two artists who my mum, Jenny West, has shown at the Sculpture Park herself
Hmm.
and had a residency in the chapel in the Sculpture Park in, I think, 2003.
Yeah, and that was before that was before the chapel was a space really open to the
Mm.
public. So it was Jenny was really using that space in an experimental way.
And that's where you work with mum.
And that's where I worked. So yeah, so I've only been in post in my current role at Sculpture Park since April. And I was delighted that this project with Liz was already happening. Um,
It's so weird.
but I used to work there years ago between 2000 and 2006. So and during that time I worked with Jenny, and that's when I first met you when you were still at college.
I was 16,
Yeah.
17,
So you were still doing
A
A
levels.
levels. Yeah, so I've known you and your work since that time. So for me to come back to the park and knowing that Liz was there, and for Liz to kind of coming to work at the park, having built up over the last 20 years an incredible body of work and range of experience, um, felt like a very serendipitous moment. So it was brilliant.
But it's a good, it feels a real like full circle
Yeah,
moment. I think that's the right term
yeah.
everywhere.
So you can see in the chapel here, this is our colour reflection. It's a work that wasn't made for this space. It was a work that existed before, but made originally for
A
a
church.
church. So that connection with the colour and the reflection and the atmosphere of a church. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, the church that it was made for was a deconsecrated church, now
Hmm.
an art gallery. So it's the most similar venue. The chapel is the most similar venue than the place it first started life,
Hmm.
which was in Scunthorpe, at the 2021 Visual Arts Centre. No stained glass in that building, a very spacious, empty floor area. And I spent a lot of time thinking in that space what that space needed, almost like a residency.
Mm.
And it was quite a tricky venue because it was historically significant and you couldn't fix to the floor or the ceiling or the walls. So the challenge was for me to imagine a work that was modular.
Mm.
Throw into the mix that at this point I'd been making work that was integrated into spaces and
Hmm.
then had to be completely ripped out. It was not sustainable at all. And I wanted to create a work that could tour.
Yeah. So luckily for us, that work existed. And I think the point you make about stained glass is a really interesting one because, of course, without this work, this space is quite a monochrome
Mm.
environment. And then with this work, what that does through the use of artificial and natural light and this highly reflective
Yeah.
surface that you use, it kind of projects the colour onto the ceiling and the walls around it.
Yeah, so it's changing all the time.
Yeah, so yes, yeah, so that's that I think that's a really good point. So not only is it responding to the static artificial lights on the ceiling that you can see here in this image, but the natural light from outside. And because we've had some dreadful weather days, but we've and those dark days, this is a really lovely space to be on. But on days that we've had incredible sunshine, kind of raking through the windows, it's
It's
been
very
different
different.
again. Yeah.
I mean, when you get that bright sunlight coming through, you get reflections of the
Mm.
windows on the walls, and when it hits the discs, it really creates these kind of smashes of
Yeah.
light and color. Whereas when it's dark outside, days like today, which have
Mm.
just been horrible, um, the artificial light is really ramping up the colored reflections on
Yeah.
the ceiling.
So maybe could we move to the next slide, Tara? Because if we don't move on, we're never going to get through everything we want to share with you. So here you can see that's more of a detailed view of how the discs appear on the floor, although they're not directly on the floor because they're kind of
On little
on
plinths.
little plinths, which kind of raise them up and give them a real sculptural
It's a sculpture.
presence. It's a
It's a
sculpture.
painting though as well.
Hmm.
It's many things.
So let's go on to the next slide and kind of go back to the beginning a
I'm so
bit.
embarrassed about this.
But it's a good one because this shows what it's like at art school, and it's about experimentation and playfulness and finding your voice. Um,
That I did
yeah.
in the end.
So you went to Glasgow.
Yeah, Glasgow was the right place for me. It was the sculpture and environmental art course, and we were allowed to play in space, and think about what space needed in a site responsive, site specific way, which is obviously my practice to a
Hmm.
T.
And when you were there, were you working in a studio or were you finding other spaces to work or
But
making
both.
dresses?
Yeah. Um, I was obsessed with being in the studio.
Hmm.
I would be in there Monday to Friday, as early as I could get in, as late as I could get out. Not that I was making decent work at that time, but I was committed, definitely.
Hmm.
In my third and final year, I started booking the different spaces around the art school that you could just have for a week or two, and I would just go in there and do what I did in Scunthorpe and just sit sometimes and just think, what should I do in this space?
Yeah.
What does this space call for? What does it need? Sometimes I would come to nothing and I'd get really frustrated and go home.
Hmm.
And then sometimes I'd make really simple interventions.
And was it intervention that was the thing that you really landed on? You weren't drawing or yeah.
I mean, I always say I can't draw, but I can because I make that's one of my starting points for making work
Hmm.
is getting it on paper. But I didn't draw at art
Hmm.
school and I didn't paint. I wasn't in painting. But I remember a very significant tutorial I had going into my second term of final year, and it was with the head of the area. So she wasn't even my tutor, Tanya Eccleston, and she just said, I've been watching you for years, and you're very sensory, very in touch with the surroundings around you.
Hmm.
She'd been shopping with me for materials at B&Q, and she'd watched me touch everything and knew that at previews I would be engaged in the conversation, but I'd be listening to everything as well
Hmm.
because my senses were just on overload. And she just said, I think that's what you need to make work about. And I think you should take a look back throughout your life and see where that's come from and pull out those strands and
Yeah,
put them
yeah.
together.
Wow, that's really interesting. It's amazing when that happens, I think,
She was
and you
great.
remember it. So moving on to the next slide, that's to this so there's a big gap in time between that last image and this one.
But there's a reason
But
why.
yeah.
There's a gap, but this work, albeit with a horizontal aperture, was my degree show. And I graduated in 2007. And I ran out of money, so I had to move back home to Barnsley with my mum and dad. It was heartbreaking leaving Glasgow, actually, because I really loved it. And
Mm.
I'd in the last year, I'd really got my teeth into it. And, for whatever reason, in my first and second year, I'd made awful art. I'd been in a long-term, long-distance relationship. And then in my final year, I had a bit of freedom and I found my voice. Um, so then to have to move back in with mum and dad was a bit crushing. And I got a job at Sheffield's Arena doing stewarding, which I did for 3 years. And so that was a bit different to making art. And I thought I could sit on an exit gate with a sketchbook and do
Hmm.
ideas. You just can't because the whole point in stewarding is you've got to be attentive. Although, the hours would drag and drag, and then a pop star would come out of their dressing room and it'd be like, wow. I think the one thing I took from that whole 3 years of experience, albeit political party conferences, sports events, festivals, gigs,
Hmm.
was the kind of live element and watching the rigging being done practically, and also the kind of light shows of
Hmm.
staging. So I'd be watching that all very closely.
Yeah. Okay. So in something like this then, which is a few years after you'd graduated, this is you
Yeah.
remaking, redoing what
Yes,
you did
yeah.
for your degree show.
It's all I had.
Yeah.
I didn't have any new ideas. And I really loved my degree show.
Hmm.
I smashed it right at the end. I was really proud. And my tutor said to me, Liz, if only you'd have been making work of this quality for 3 years, you'd have got a first class degree. I was like, oh, God. My 2-1 was fine, though,
Hmm.
but I did find my
Hmm.
feet, luckily. I'd had that light bulb moment,
Hmm.
pun intended. But I left stewarding. I knew it wasn't what I wanted to do forever. And I started applying for things with images from my degree show.
Hmm.
And I started getting opportunities to remake. And here we are remaking it for the Northern Futures Awards at Barnsley Civic.
Wow. So it's quite close to home.
Really close to home,
Yeah.
yeah.
But nice to do that, I guess, to bring
Yeah.
that back to home.
So I didn't have to
Okay.
travel anywhere.
Yeah. And then following on from that on the next slide, we can see this. So this is straight away afterwards, pretty much you're making
Yeah.
and thinking about this. So say a little bit about this. In the previous slide, we saw something that was very saturated colour, collected objects of a certain colour,
Mm-hmm.
creating this incredibly materially saturated space. But it was
Yeah.
the objects that were coloured
No,
and the
and the
lighting
light as
and the
well.
lighting.
But all those objects are the same colour. So I built collections
Yeah.
because I thought, as well as being interested in colour and light, because of my sensory nature, I was also really interested in collections and making collections. So that's why the objects were in the work. And then this piece is when I just moved to Manchester. I I need to say this, Alex, but the thing has to come out. Now it's a bit of the elephant in the room. Some of you know this, some of you don't, but I have the Guinness World Record. Here we go. For having the biggest Spice Girls collection in the world. Um, which you know.
Yeah, well, I remember you collecting that when you were really from when you were very, very
I was
young.
11
Yeah,
when they
yeah,
came
yeah.
out. And it was obsessive.
Hmm.
And so that makes sense now, of course, why I was incorporating objects of
Yeah.
collections into the work and making these collections in very fastidious and obsessive ways.
Hmm.
And of course, that's what I thought I was interested in to make work about. By the time I had been out of uni for 3 years, I had written letters to museums offering them to hire my Spice Girls collection as a loan, as an exhibition, which Leeds City Museum did do in 2011. They paid me £10,000, which allowed me to move to Manchester, get a studio, um, never have a part-time job. And that's where I've been ever since. And
Yeah,
of course,
yeah,
the Spice Girls collection did fund my practice to start with. And it's allowed me to have this amazing trajectory that I have now.
yeah.
But the work we're looking at, Difference is Important, was my first solo exhibition in Manchester. Mark Devereaux ran Blank Space, where the exhibition was. He wrote a funding bid, Arts Council money. We got, I think, £10,000. We made 3 really epic, I thought, works. This one being incorporating all these 4 rooms together as one piece, which were carpeted, lit, and painted super saturate colours.
Yeah, so I saw this work and I remember that experience of walking between the rooms and being immersed
Mm-hmm.
in those spaces was, I remember, very important to you because that was a departure from the earlier works which you could only observe from the outside. Is that right?
Yeah, well, with the Chamber series, which is the yellow one that you've seen before, people were always, and I was very frustrated that you couldn't be inside them.
Hmm.
And I think that's what people had always said is like, how do we get inside? How can we be in them? That idea took a while to resonate
Yeah,
and come
yeah.
into fruition, but I got
Yeah,
there.
but also working with entire room-sized spaces
It's
to make a
huge.
work is quite an undertaking,
Yeah.
and you need the space, but also you need the means to make that happen.
I needed the money.
Yeah.
And to make this piece, I remember it cost a couple of £1,000, and it was me, Mark, and another artist friend, David Ogle,
Mm.
who teched to make it ourselves.
And as you'd mentioned before, what's different from our colour reflection, which you can see at YSP, is, as you'd said, this is a work that only exists in that location at that time, and then it's gone.
That's it.
So let's move on to the next slide, because this is kind of a bit of both of what we've talked about, both object-based but also an entire installation.
This work is the first seed of our colour reflection, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think without this piece, we wouldn't have our colour reflection. It was silver mirrors just off the floor, but what was propping them up was T9 fluorescent lamps with filters, theatrical filters stapled around them. Wires exposed. It was a drawing in space. Again, I'd got some money from Arts Council to do some research and development. I'd bought materials to play with. It was just at the end of the financial crash in Manchester.
So there were lots of empty spaces. Yeah.
So I made this piece and the next one, Tara, please. So yeah, this was in the same exhibition, these two works. And again, it was really important for me, and this still is the case, that works have a daytime presence and a nighttime presence. They can't just exist as one or the other.
Yeah.
But they were super sculptural, but they were human scale.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's the
But also
key.
This for me is also, it's quite experimental. So this is you testing out materials, light in space with people.
Because this work we're looking at, tempo, a few hours before that photograph was taken, it was just a line of fluorescent lamps leant up against a wall, Dan Flavin style. And then I just started stacking them, knowing that they had this immense fragility and could just break apart.
Crash, yeah.
And they didn't. And I was like, this is a very satisfying work, and only I can make it. And I really liked that. I liked the hand of the artist, which has obviously changed a bit recently. But yeah, I still like that one. But then after that show at Piccadilly Place in Manchester, which was I think 2013, I then had a bit of a crash of confidence, and you'll see on the next slide, Tara, please, that I just had to I went a bit nuts.
So this is you regrouping with yourself, really, isn't it? So this is a residency that you had, and a space.
Well, I thought I was going to make lots of stuff. I had a week at the Mertzbahn in Cumbria, which is raw and rural. And every night I had to go and light a candle for schwitters in the barn. Yeah, it's intense. And we'd have to, gather the chickens, feed the chickens, collect their eggs, chop the wood, light the fires, sleep in an asbestos-filled caravan, which we lasted one night. I say we, it was me and one of my really good artist friends, Alana Tyson, a Canadian artist who we went together. And I thought I was going to go and fabricate lots of things. And she was being really productive, which was really frustrating.
But this looks pretty productive.
It was in the end, it was. But for the first few days, I think I just cried. I don't know what I want to do. I don't know who I am as an artist anymore. I was just depleted of confidence. And it was Mark, who was my husband now at this point, who said, right, don't try and put too much pressure on yourself. Just strip the walls down and write on the walls, why light, why colour, why are you an artist? And then we'll come and give you a big crit at the end of the week.
Okay. And how did that feel?
Emotional. Yeah, there was a lot of raw emotions, and I mean, my tutorial with Alana and Mark went on and on and on, and it was. I remember I can just see it. I'm just there. I remember just being on these plastic school chairs, looking at this wall, and I just felt bombarded by all these ideas. But I think I knew through writing all these ideas down over the course of a week that I'd gathered my thoughts enough to go on.
Yeah. And so if we go to the next slide, this is
what went on.
This is what went on. So tell us a bit about this, because this, not only this work, but actually this particular image was quite a significant moment, I think, for you.
For many reasons. So the work was in a space called Castlefield's New Art Spaces. It was Federation House, which was the cooperative's old headquarters in Manchester, near Shude Hill. It was available in January for a week. You paid £60 to Castlefield. I know. You were given the keys on the Monday morning, you handed them back on the Monday morning after. And I had no money, I had no materials, I had nothing. I'd done the Merzbarn residency in the October the year before. This is now January that this image was taken. I played around with a bin bag full of scrap filters, theatre gels, and I realised that I wanted to make a light work. I didn't have anything physical or tangible to put in the space, anything sculptural as such, and it was a huge space. So I decided to start playing around with maybe covering the lights in the space with the filters. I tried cutting squares to fit neatly over the lights. I just didn't have enough. So I had to pull down the grates, which had like 40 years worth of dust in them, and tape them with sellotape and to cover the lamps. And I just worked across the space, starting with blue in January at about 3 o'clock. As we know, it's getting dark. And there was this really magical moment where the sky was this beautiful sapphire. And so the work ran through the space and then out the window and into the sky.
So it connected.
It connected.
Yeah.
I installed it myself. It took 4 days. When I was getting towards the pink end of the space, I would be able to look back and see that it was indeed working as I wanted it to. And I started talking about it on my social media. I put out my own little, notifications to people to come. There was an opening on the Friday night. It was open 2 till 8 Saturday and Sunday afternoon to make the most of that, capturing that magic hour. And then on the Sunday night, me and Mark spent 2 hours up ladders, ripping it all down, went for a very big pizza, and that was the end. And then I had done a skills swap with a friend who took 6 high-res digital images of the work for me. I did some mentoring for him. And he handed me the memory stick with the images on, unedited. And on the Monday, I started writing a press release about it and sent off the images. And I think it was seen about 5 million times within 24 hours.
Because it's such a powerful image of quite an extraordinary space.
It's real.
Yeah,
it's not. There's no AI going.
Yeah. So that kind of impact of that, and I assume quite a big impact on your confidence in knowing what you were doing.
It was weird. It was quite strange. So people had always said, do you think you're going to have a big moment? When's that going to come? Have you had it yet? Do you have a big moment as an artist? I was like, might have just had one.
So that's super interesting. And then I think from this moment on, so if we go to the next slide, this is you working on a really different kind of scale with immersion and material. So now this is, and I think say a little bit about this, because I think this is really interesting in terms of what it was commissioned for, where it was commissioned, and the process.
Yeah, so when I was making Our Colour Perception, and around that time I was starting to invite people to my studio to have visits and conversations about the work. Yeah, it helped grow my confidence.
Yes.
And I really wanted to show it. At this point, no one was showing my work. As you've seen, the previous 2 exhibitions were completely DIY. Completely.
Yeah.
I invited Lindsay Taylor from Salford University to come for a studio visit. Unbeknownst to me, she had been asked by Bradford's Science and Media Museum to recommend any Northwest-based artists who worked in light. She said my name. I was put on a 2-man shortlist, or 2-person shortlist. The artist didn't turn up. I did, with loads of ideas and a laptop full of images. And I showed the staff, the curatorial staff, images of my degree show. Because I didn't have a lot else, really. I had what we've seen up to now. And I said, look, I want to make my degree show, but I want to be in it. The exhibition it was for was Light Fantastic. It was to celebrate UNESCO's International Year of Light in 2015. So this is in the June. it was the first time I was tasked with a budget, a £30,000 budget, and a team
Hmm.
and an archive in a museum
Hmm.
to sift through an inspiration. And yeah, I made a piece that took the principle that all colours together make white light.
Yeah, and you can kind of see that happening in this, can't you? So
Mm-hmm.
eventually, all of the colours that are in this square of mirrored
Mm-hmm.
room start to merge and make white light.
Absolutely, and there's 250 different colours in that room.
Hmm.
And this piece is currently, and it's never been shown since, but it's currently at the Trapholt Museum of Modern Art in Denmark. It's been remade specially. So that's been really nice to see it up again.
Yeah, brilliant. So this, and also this makes me want to pause as well and kind of say what you're doing on this journey that is your career is also accruing this incredible knowledge about um, reflected light, light, different coloured light, material knowledge. You're kind of creating a bank of expertise, which is really extraordinary, I think, in terms of your relationship with those
I'm obsessive
materials.
by
Mm.
nature. I think that's come across already. But I am obsessive in my quest for knowledge and my the way I interrogate
Hmm.
materials and information.
Hmm.
So I'm always asking questions. And there's people watching this who, a few of you who've probably spoken to me today, who know how many questions I ask. Um, and yeah, I love my
Mm.
materials, and I've got banks of drawers behind
Yeah,
me
well,
that are
we'd
filled.
had pulled out because we wanted to prove we were in a studio. So we'll get to some of this, but we've pulled out like a whole set of samples, different kinds of amazing materials that Liz has kind of investigated and used, and probably often not used in the way
They're supposed
that
to
they're
be.
supposed to be, which is a very, artistic thing to do. So having all of this to hand in Liz's studio, I think is it's really crucial, isn't it, for you to think about?
I have to have it to hand, Abby.
Yeah.
I have to, it's like a space. When I begin making a piece of work well, not actually physically making it, but thinking of the idea for it, I have to visit it. I
Hmm.
have to feel what that space does to me physically. How does it make me feel from a sensory point of view? And with the materials, it's the same. So this sheet here, I mean, the hours I have spent holding that up to the light, to choose color palettes, I mean, that is a well used
Mm. Yeah, but it's not
thing.
only you choosing a colour palette, it's your kind of knowledge of colour theory,
Mm-hmm.
the effects of colour on your emotions as well and your state of mind. So if we go to the next slide, I'm very conscious of time because we are clearly we could be talking all night here. But this I think is very interesting and kind of another departure in terms of creating. So this is you moving outdoors and making public work.
This was a nightmare. Yeah, it was my first outdoor piece.
But you say nightmare, but
But I've learned such a
hugely
lot.
successful, and you continue to learn from this piece. I know that's what you said to me.
Yeah, I do. The first piece of outdoor sculpture in the same year as the previous two slides, so that was a big year. Um, Very small budget. I had to go into the, interview saying I need double the budget, which felt scary. I got it. The original idea for this was a tunnel with a roof on, and me and the fabricators who I just started working with for the first time on this piece were like, Liz, you can't put a roof on it because of snow loading and it's not stable and it's going to be temporary and yada yada yada.
So you went for the most simple, stable.
So no, we said we couldn't do it. We
Oh,
actually said we
okay,
cannot do
right.
this commission, even with the double budget, which was
Hmm.
only still 20,000. Um, so we said no. And then Simon, who I hardly met from M3 Industries, said, well, why don't we scrap your idea of doing it in a tunnel and just basically said, well, just do that. And he said, you can make up some excuses why you've made it into a prism. I'm sure there's some like, I was like, Simon, you're a genius. And this is the whole idea of working alone as an artist, often in a studio by yourself. And I really relish teamwork and collaboration. I
Mm.
love it. And working with fabricators, although I'm physically not building the work, I am generally making every single decision down to what colour the bolts are,
Hmm.
and how big a gap between the
Well, it's
panels.
that attention to detail,
Yeah.
isn't it, that you bring to that
But so, I've
process.
been working now with M3 ever since because we both learnt a lot on this, and
It still exists
sadly,
because it's actually the materials.
it's
It's
decaying,
decaying, yeah.
and it shouldn't be outside, but it is. Mhm.
So if we go to the next slide, this is kind of going back to where we started talking, but I think it's really interesting to see this now as part of your journey. So this is literally your sketch on the back of an
You can
envelope.
see the envelope.
Yeah. Of you thinking about this work originally in 2016 and the kind of presence that so this was you thinking, as you'd said before, thinking about making a work that you could remake in different spaces.
Desperately wanting to be more sustainable. I
Yeah.
mean, I know that my materials are not sustainable because often they're plastics. But the way I have to use the materials is super sustainable. The
Hmm.
fact that this piece of work has now been touring and existing for 9 years, and it's been
Mm.
shown in 13 different venues in, I think, 6 different countries.
Yeah, so if you go to the next slide, Tori, you can start to see some of the different venues it in. So that's 2021.
Visual Arts Centre.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, not the year, but yes.
But this is its original form, and yeah, this was the first time I'd used natural light indoors.
Hmm. But then if we go to the next slide, you'll see it in a different location. I just think it's really interesting to look at the
That's
difference.
Berlin.
So that's Berlin, a very Berlin kind of space, and no natural light there.
None. So that's using big, powerful stage lights,
Hmm.
and it's very theatrical, obviously, in its nature.
Yeah, but this for me is so interesting because you know exactly what the quality of the different lights will do to this work. So it isn't, by this stage, you're not really experimenting anymore because you actually are building this body of
Yeah.
knowledge that means that you know what you're doing with this, and you
Yeah,
can see it, can't you, before you do it?
yeah. This is called Hyperphantasia. Great name for a show. One day, the retrospective. Hyperphantasia is wonderful, but not at the same time. So it means that I have a very vivid, and active imagination where I can absolutely see what anything, not just my work, looks like in my mind's eye. You can imagine what my dreams are like. They're very, very saturate, very, very vivid. But with this piece of work, when I first went into the church in Scunthorpe, and just sat on the floor for hours, I got back and did that drawing on the back of the envelope,
Hmm.
sent it to the curator, and he was like, "Yeah, trust you completely, do it."
Hmm.
And then I remember I couldn't visit this site in Berlin because I was very, very pregnant with my first child at this point. But I was sent lots of photographs and video documentation of the space. And between me and the production team, we decided on the configuration of the work,
Hmm.
the format it was going to take within the space, the fact that it would be lovely that you could look down on it from the balconies.
Hmm.
And I think this is only the only other time that you've been able to do this other than at Sculpture
Yeah,
Park.
yeah, yeah. Um, let's move on to the next slide. So, we've already had a hint of this in this, haven't we? This
Yeah.
incredible material, which I'm hoping kind of picks up on the camera.
That's, if you hold it right to the camera,
Oh yeah, then you can see us through it.
but then it reflects the contrasting colour. It's beautiful. I have loads of them. I'd never used dichroic glass before, or dichroic anything, but I was obsessed with it. And I really wanted to use it. And then this opportunity came up to work with the same exhibition designers, architects that I had done at the Media Museum in Bradford. And this was at the Natural History Museum. So this was another amazing opportunity
Hmm.
because I'd been there as a child and I
Hmm.
find it like a cathedral of nature. It's brilliant. I remember going for my interview being really, it's the first time I'd been like really, really, really nervous, like sick nervous because I wanted it so much. And the whole premise of the exhibition was how different species and specimens see light and color.
Hmm.
And they wanted an artist to make a piece of work in the entrance to tell that story. So I thought dichroic glass was perfect because, as well, quite a lot of specimens in nature have
That iridescence,
iridescence.
so which is what we're seeing in
Yeah,
this. Yeah.
yeah. So
Okay.
beetles, birds' wings. So it was like the perfect thing. I mean, I could just give an hour's talk on that
Hmm.
commission.
But we haven't got
No, no.
that much time. So we're going to move on because what I think is really interesting in this is then when we go to the next slide is this kind of repeating form that you're kind of also building into your work. And again, this is another drawing which shows
It's
how you're
awful.
thinking of, but it's a working drawing.
Yeah.
It's kind of plotting out what then
I knew
happens.
exactly what was in my head again. And I just had to somehow get it down on paper to make someone else somehow see it.
And this drawing goes into kind of influences the next work and the next slide, Tara, which is this installation, an outdoor installation. So
Well,
this is a
that's,
computer rendering
yeah,
of that.
yeah.
So this is you working up the detail.
I can't do renders. So this at this point, I would have been in commission enough for the fabricators to be paid to do
To do
renders
that. Okay. So, and then if we go to the next slide, you can see what this work looks like in reality
in Paddington.
in Paddington. So it's in this, again, quite a brutal space. And
Oh, it
then,
was awful. And I remember doing a site visit and walking along it and just thinking, you know, the litmus test as a lone female traveller
mhm,
is, do I feel safe in this space, or am I doing that thing where I'm constantly having to look behind me and get my car keys ready, you know?
mhm.
And I just felt that I knew what the space needed instinctively, and I knew that my site
And
was the wall.
yeah, and so, and when you've made this work, presumably then it changes the whole
Yeah.
atmosphere of how you feel there. Yeah. So here you're working with repeated colours and kind of an origami quality to this. And I thought that was really fascinating because you've explained this to me before. Say a little bit about this kind of little return at the bottom of each of the columns.
I don't know if you can see it on my drawing um, from 2 slides ago, but the top, the bottom detail was the same as the top
Mhm,
detail. And once we put it in render and put a little figure in, we realised that the sharp end would be exactly eye height,
mhm,
and that just practically that isn't
mhm.
great for a public art piece, especially as I wasn't allowed to use the concrete part of the wall below. It could only sit on the brickwork part. So I had to kind of very quickly think of how to mitigate that, really.
Yeah, so if we go to the next slide, you can see this detail. So this, and well, this says to me lots of things about your work, particularly and making work for public space, because public work for public space is a constant negotiation with that space. So where you're in a gallery, you're not really bound by rules of health and safety and public safety and all that kind of thing. But in working in these spaces, all of that comes into play.
Mhm.
And those boundaries can often actually be quite a creative edge to kind of rub against because you're finding solutions and finding kind of creative ways to work with the space. And then in this slide, I think you can see the level of detail
Go on, yeah.
um, that Liz works with here. So this is colour matching the bolts that hold this together to the surface decoration,
So the
which
surface is ACM, so it's an aluminium composite material with this stuff, clear vinyl over the top. So you can't get aluminium in this many colours, to my knowledge,
mhm.
that are within budget of
Yeah,
this piece.
yeah, yeah.
So it had to be like, right, we'll use polished aluminium. You couldn't use mirror because
It would
it would
shatter.
smash.
Yeah.
So it had to be polished aluminium with this vinyl overlaid. So it gave it this kind of mirrored quality, but wasn't mirror,
Mhm.
with these spray matched bolts. And you know, the idea of using prisms, obviously for someone who's really interested in light, it's a real staple of
Yeah,
light science.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, we see the prism again. And then if we go to the next slide, which is a drawing, and then quickly onto the next slide, you'll see that drawing transformed into another material in another incredible space.
Yeah, that one. So that, again, this was
Maybe hold it a bit close to the camera
give
so
it the
you can pick that up. That this is this incredible perspex that has this neon
edge.
edge.
again, I'd been obsessed with this material and I'd wanted to use it, but not quite found the right opportunity. I think that's important to say, is that I'm not just going to use a material for the sake of using it ever. It has to be right. It
Hmm.
has to be right for the space, the opportunity, the visitors, the brief. Um, and this was for Paris Fashion Week. And the space came after the work, interestingly, although you wouldn't know it.
No, no, it looks really
So it was
very,
someone's job to go
yeah.
and find a space for the work, and she did a
Okay.
brilliant job.
Hmm.
Um, and they wanted the fashion company wanted to empower a woman and commission an artist to make a work rather than do a runway show for their first Paris Fashion Week. And the drawing was my proposal,
Yeah.
but it also acted as a map. And similarly to the work in the chapel at Sculpture Park, there was rules and systems that I gave myself. So, for example,
So could you go to the next slide or that next one? That's it.
I couldn't put the same colour next to each other. And I know you're all screaming at your laptops going, yeah, but there's two reds next to each other. They're not. One's orange, one's red. And you're also saying, yeah, but there's three yellows next. They're not. There's like a yellow, then there's a green, and then there's another yellow. So I mean, the image maybe doesn't depict that well on
Or can't
screen,
pick up the subtlety.
but that
Yeah.
there was the subtleties there in the
Yeah.
space.
Yeah,
I
very
love
nice.
that piece. My
Yeah,
rain catches.
yeah, very nice. So if we then go to the next slide. So this is very different again, but again, a public space with lots more restrictions.
So many restrictions. This is a hospital. This is the Clatterbridge Cancer Centre in Liverpool, which was a new build during COVID. And I was commissioned to make this piece that wrapped around the walls. Leslie, if you're listening, thank you so much for this opportunity and your friendship. But what a hellish opportunity this was. And so many restrictions, trying to get a piece installed during COVID in a hospital where patients were being brought in. Um, Everything like don't talk to me about infection control. You know, you can't just put artwork into hospitals, which is quite a nice thing. It made me feel very safe as a patient going into
Hmm.
hospitals. But from an artist's point of view, very limiting.
So if you go to the next slide, you can see what the kind of solution that you're coming up with here, which is particularly like unlike the last work, which was that transparent perspex. This is applied colour
Mm.
on a surface, so not transparent. But say a little bit about how you kind of dealt with that.
Well, I knew that there were people going to be sitting in these areas waiting to have consultations that were going to give them life affirming or life devastating news. And this was an artwork that they were going to have to look at. And so it needed to have flow and ebb and movement within
Mhm.
it, which would take the eye. And so I thought about surface color, but I wanted to create a light within that. So me and my fabricators we invented a computer. Well, I didn't. Simon invented a computer program that generated these shards with certain colors. So I'd input the colors and the length of the shards, and it would spit it out. And we did like 100 meters worth. And then he printed them all out, and I sat there with a magnifying glass analog and went with a little pen like this needs to be shorter, that needs to be longer, that needs to be yellow, that needs to be blue, and then it was printed on antibacterial wallpaper.
Wow. Okay. And so that runs along the length of the corridors of this.
So it's
Yeah.
like the atrium, and
Yeah.
this wraps the whole space.
And then you took this idea. So if we go to the next slide, this one. So this is taking that same kind of composition,
Yeah.
um, but here working with a transparent surface. So kind of taking it back into that more transparent, light infused way of working.
I mean, the Clatterbridge was hugely challenging for many
Hmm.
reasons, but very, very rewarding at the
Yeah,
same
of
time, knowing
course.
who the audience was.
Yeah.
And no one's ever been allowed in that hospital other than the patients and the
Hmm.
staff, and they all love it.
Hmm.
That is like winner. This piece, on the other hand, was in Greenwich, seen by hundreds of thousands of people, and I was given the opportunity and offered a site visit. And I remember the curators wanting our colour reflection. Oh, everybody wants our colour reflection, Alex. And they wanted to be able to stand on the linear park and look down onto the mirrors. And I was like, no, it's not
Hmm.
right. First of all, it's an indoor piece. But having done my site visit on the most dreary day, I realised that there was 700 metres of glass balustrade. It's a ready-made canvas.
Yeah.
And so instead of creating a sculpture or an installation and the cost of materials, I wanted to kind of wrap the balustrade with this kind of undulating ribbon of colour.
Yeah. So if we go to the next slide, you can see the effect is not just the balustrade itself, but then the kind of projected.
Yeah, but it's Greenwich. You're on the meridian line. It's a
Mhm.
sundial.
Very good. Yeah, nice, nice,
It
nice connection.
had to be. Again, it was the right work for the right
Yeah.
place.
And then let's go on to the next slide because this is not unrelated, I don't think, in terms of how you're working with colour and
Again, it's a
for
sundial. So
yeah.
when I first was asked to make a piece in the public realm, which was the prism
Hmm.
through number three, I was never going to put a statue on a plinth. That's just not. I was never going to make a static
Mm.
piece. I wanted people to be able to enter into it like a pavilion. And so this piece called Hymn to the Big Wheel, Hymn to the Big Wheel being a little nod to Massive Attack's song Hymn of the Big Wheel, which is all about the sun moving around its axis and how we all go about our lives day to day. So this piece, people can enter into and experience the world through colour mixes. So each panel is covered with two vinyls that overlap and make a new colour. So there's lots of colour theory going on.
Yeah, so if we look at the next slide, this is the drawing for that, I assume.
Yeah,
And then on to the next slide, that gives you that in reality.
yeah. And then in the
And
dark,
then in the dark,
Tara.
and then in the dark. So all of the ways that that can be experienced. But I mean, that's what happens in the public realm because, of course, you can't just think of it being one kind of weather or one season or one time of day. It kind of has to work throughout all of those things. So
Yeah.
to kind of be able to do that with light and color, I think is really incredible. And then we're coming up to date now. So this is
And an end, you'll be pleased to know.
so this is something that launched pretty much simultaneously with your work at YSP. So this is in King's Cross, and this is well, you tell us about this.
This is alive and happening now.
So you can
Yeah,
see that if you go to London and you're near King's Cross, you can go and see this incredible work.
in Granary Square. It's just in front of Central St Martin's, which, Tara, if you flip to the next slide, you'll see in the daylight. Um, there's so much to say about this, but very quickly, my agent, MTR agency, phoned me up, I think in August, maybe, maybe September. No, it was August, and said, um, King's Cross Christmas tree. And I was like, yep, I know that commission because I'd watched that happen
Mhm.
over the last 10 years. Some of my favourite artists have had that commission. And at the time, I was working with the Connaught Patisserie to make some miniature versions of my artwork in cake form.
Yeah.
Brilliant opportunity. And I had this sat on my desk. And I'd been making flat collages and then cutting them up or making them into 3D net shapes. And that had been just sat right there on my desk as a potential cake idea. And when Lucy phoned me and said, King's Cross, I was, I've got an idea. And it was like straight away, it was like, of course, that's a
Hmm.
Christmas tree in the most modern, sharpest sense. Again, I've never used neon. Here it is. Never used neon vinyl. I've always been a bit afraid of it, but always wanted to use it just because you need kind of sunglasses to see it. And this felt, again, the right time, an opportunity, but I've
But
had
so
to use
if
black to kind of
Yeah, so
counterbalance it.
could you go to the next slide, Tara, because this shows it at night. So I
Yeah.
hadn't realized this because of course, so I'd seen this at night and was struck by how bright it was, but there's a reason for that, which is the fact that the lights are UV. So
Yes. Yeah.
they're kind of interacting with the
So this
surface.
is UV vinyl. It's made to obviously have a presence in daylight or normal light, but if you shine UV or purple light at this,
Hmm.
it's going to glow like you're in a nightclub, that kind of vibe.
Hmm.
Which neatly and relevantly references my absolute love of pop music. It does.
Yeah, yeah.
My palette is derived from the 90s and my childhood
Hmm.
and my interests. So yeah, this is called fluorescence and it is not internally lit, it's externally lit with UV and it glows and it's on until the end of February.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. And then the last slide is just to kind of remind us that this work, as well as the King's Cross work, can be seen till the 5th of January. But I hope you've had a sense in this conversation that we've kind of taken you through Lizzie's career, but also talked about some of the circles and circles back and the way things happen. I love how honest you've been about what that journey looks like for an artist.
Oh, there's so much you could just.
Because it's not an easy journey.
It's a roller coaster, isn't it?
I'm going to have a quick look at the chat to see if we've had any questions in. Um, just bear with me a minute and see what we've got here. So, oh, here we go. Here's a question. Thank you. So this is a question from Anna. What materials are you working with currently or would like to work with that demonstrate how you inform your concern with sustainability and the environmental crisis?
I mean, it is a hot topic, and like I've said earlier in the talk, I am aware that some of my materials aren't sustainable. They are a byproduct of the aviation industry.
Okay. Yeah.
That's what polyurethane, polyester, poly
Hmm.
is. So when COVID happened and aviation stopped, that's why the cost of this went sky high because there was no fuel to then refine to make into acrylic.
Right.
So yeah, really unsustainable as a product. But because I'm using it and then I'm reusing it, and if there's any cut-offs, I'm reusing the cut-offs as well.
So you're very efficient with your
So efficient.
material.
So for example, I'm working on a commission right now, and me and the fabricators are quite a lot of the sizing of the work is based on maximizing the most of the sheet material. So
Hmm.
there's zero waste actually in this new piece. And if there is waste, I'm using it to make little models and maquettes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'm just looking if there's any more questions. If not, I will ask one because we are kind of coming up to time, and I know that an hour is a long time to be on Zoom for anybody. So what next, Liz? What's coming up? What are you thinking of, or what kinds of materials, opportunities, things are kind of occupying you at the minute?
I mean, my brain's a bit noodle, to be honest,
Yeah.
because on a daily basis, what does the day of an artist look like? And I am flitting about from
Hmm.
project to project, whether that's on emails, phone calls, meetings, site visits, you name it. So let's take today
Hmm.
just as an example, because I think more than that would just, yeah. I have been talking to the Public Arts Trust of India today.
Okay.
I am flying out to Jaipur at the end of January to do a mini residency. To hopefully make a piece in 2026 for Jaipur, and then I will be flying on to New Delhi to make a piece of work for the British Council of India. So that's January.
Hmm.
Um, I'm also working on a suspended commission in London. I can't say too much more about that, but that's what me and my fabricators are currently building now and going through all the kind of um, structural engineering
Hmm.
sign-offs for before it starts getting made. So for the last week, I've been doing like my colours, working out where I
Hmm.
want each colour, which colour I can use. Yeah. Stretching into 2025. Oh my goodness.
Hmm.
Um, I have lots of drawings of ideas that have never been
Hmm.
made, which I'd quite like to get made. Um, I mean, there's a list. It's big.
Okay, I think that's
There's a
probably
lot.
that's probably a really good place to leave it. It just remains for me to thank you all for listening. Um, you've got Liz's website address there and her Instagram, and I would really encourage you to follow Liz because I think um, now you know quite a lot about the journey that she's been on. I'm sure you'll want to follow where things go next and see some of these Indian um, experiences.
Speaking of India, me in India,
Yeah,
like the colour.
be incredible. So thank you all. Thank you for your attention, for the questions and the comments. So I hope to see you again soon at the Sculpture Park or on another one of our online talks.